Hey everyone, welcome to Starr Mazer TV. I'm Auston Montville, the game developer on Starr Mazer, and today we're doing a pretty special episode. In front of me, well, in front of you, which is in front of me, is my computer desktop, which is showing Unity, and we're actually going to be working on Starr Mazer today. So we're going to just sort of see how this goes. I've got some work that I want to do. I've got a couple of things that I want to put in the engine, some things I want to try out, and we're just going to go ahead and dive into it. If you have questions along the way, if there are things that you want to see, I'll be reading up on the chat. I've got that over here on the side window. So yeah, just hop on the chat and we'll talk about things. But otherwise, I'm just going to work through things. I'm going to talk about it a little bit as I go into it, but when I get focused, I'm going to probably just be focused on the code, and I might not speak up as much. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to actually take a look at the enemy's movement system in here. We've got these spline editors that allow us to move enemies, so I'm going to be making a new pattern to show you that. We'll get a little bit familiar with that. We'll put in some new enemy patterns of the game, and then from there we'll probably start expanding some of the code that we have in the game. So right now, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Unity before, but this is sort of the setup that I have here. We've got this game window right here that you can see brick, and you can see a zoomed up Star Wolf right there. Also the UI. This is where our game actually plays, and that's where we're going to see all the code going on. If I hit play, we'll jump right into the game, and we'll actually be able to move around and play a little bit. So this is one of our areas, one of the interior locations that we have. We've got some enemies spawning. I can move around. I can shoot enemies and whatnot. And so what these guys are doing is these enemies are here. I'm going to pause this, and we're going to go take a look at what's going on. I'm going to show you the scaffolds, if you will. So this is what actually Starr Mazer looks like. It's a bunch of 2D images. It's all really flat. There's a couple of 3D colliders in there that you never see in the game. But what's really going on here with the enemy movement that I want to take a look at is that these guys are moving along splines. So if I go ahead and grab one of these enemies, which is in the enemy factory somewhere in here. There we go. They all have little splines, which I have to go find that. Here we go. We have a spline loop right here. So this is the path that the enemies actually follow. If we go by frame, you can see that the enemies are traveling along. I'm drawing on my finger, but you don't see my finger because you just see my face. But anyway, yeah. So what happens is the enemies will spawn. We'll play through it a little bit. Let me get both the windows up so we can look at these side by side and get a little space. So on the left, or on the right here, we have the actual game window of the game being played. On the left, we have the window of the editor. And when we play through, you'll see that enemies will spawn in and go over. Actually, the level's ending, so we'll restart this real quick so you can see what's going on here in detail. So an enemy just popped in. We're going to go take a look at that actual enemy loop. So they come in at this first dot right here that I can select. I can actually edit this. I've never edited it in real time. Let's see what happens. Sweet, they automatically update. I never really tried that. So we can actually edit these little spine loops, but you'll see that they're going to travel along this curve, and they'll fly off to the edge of the screen, where eventually when they get off, they go destroy themselves, essentially, so we can reuse them later on. And so I can actually edit these curves, which is kind of neat, and that's how we make enemy movement patterns in the game. So we're going to go back into that, and we're going to just start playing with this a little bit so you can see sort of the control that we have. Just like if you're familiar with editing curves in any sort of like a visual editing program, it's the same sort of idea. You've got these handles. We can actually break them apart so we can make sort of a curved dip. So we'll make a little heart shape for the enemies because that's adorable. I'll clean this up a little bit. Oh, we're grabbing background elements. Don't want that. There's a lot of things that you can easily grab in the editor here because I've got a bunch of things stacked on top of each other. But we're going to just make a nice little heart pattern. Oh, isn't that the cutest? Alright, and so now when our enemies fly, they'll fly in a cute little heart pattern. And they get a little dip there, but I can still blow them up. So we're going to go make some new spline patterns. We're going to go check this out. Before I get to that, though, I'm going to read up on the chat here because there's some chat things going on. So you'll see me occasionally turn off to the side here and start to be quiet a little bit. I'll read the questions out loud just to see where we're going up. So we've got Serbius asking, Had any major hiccups while working on the game, such as game crashing bugs? The game is like super early right now, so actually like we haven't had any huge hiccups. It's mostly been just sort of deciding and figuring out the systems that we're putting into the game and the best way to do it. For example, the system that drives the narrative with characters interacting and responding to the world events and being able to converse with your character, have interesting dialogue. That's already been rewritten twice. So I came into it with two different approaches, and neither of those really worked very well. But Don's approach, which he had been developing over years, which is the sort of final act system, the event system that we've talked about in previous episodes of Starr Mazer TV, that's what we're actually using right now. And so we've gone through a couple iterations of that. There have been some things that have proved challenging right now, but as far as like major bugs and whatnot that prevent the game from running, the game is so early that those aren't necessarily the core concerns. We're really just building up the core functionality and making sure everything feels good right now. The notice says, hey Austin, super excited to see some of the tools you folks have worked on Starr Mazer. Awesome, we're going to get to that. We're going to get to all those details. Triptide's asking if anyone's having a problem with the video. So if you guys are noticing that the volume's weird or if the video's not showing up, if anyone's having a problem with this, just let me know in the stream. This is a new setup. We're actually not at Imagos headquarters. We're at 2DX headquarters. You'll notice that the background here is a little bit different. We don't have the same assets on here. So this is my own mobile setup. So if anything's odd or off, let me know that so I can hopefully update that, or we'll take a break at some point. I can iterate on this. Let's see here. All right, we got another question from Lenoda, or Lenodea. Are you thinking about taking any of the tools you've built for Starr Mazer and putting them on the Unity Asset Store post-release? Unity Asset Store I'm not absolutely sure of, but so we've already released one of the tools for the game. The event system that drives the majority of Starr Mazer, actually we'll be using it a little bit here, is actually up on GitHub. It's open source. If you go to my GitHub account, which is Pickles2DX, I'll provide a link in the chat eventually. You can actually download the source code for the event system for Unity, and if you are using Unity, you can just start working with this right now. We might talk about that a little bit because the way enemies are implemented is based off that system. What the event system allows us to do is to implement features into the game without having to write code. Basically, I write the groundwork, I write these classes and these pieces of code that then end up into the editor, this sort of visual editor that you see here, and you can use that to implement pieces of the game. And I've been using that through the large portion of development at this point. Ideally, it's going to get to the point where not ideally, it will get to the point where Christina and Don will be able to interact with the engine directly and be able to just write assets and make animations and drop their content directly into the game without me having to interfere, which allows us to create a lot of content a lot faster. And so a lot of the development time is going to be spent on iterating on that, making the UI intuitive, easy to use, understandable, so that development can go really fast and they don't have to just ask me for features, they can just put it into the game themselves. Let's see here. More questions, so we're going to keep going with this. Serbia says, what's the average time it takes to make one shmup stage? So that's an interesting question because it could take me like 10 seconds, depending on how much content we have in the game. I'll go into exactly how shmup stages are built, and that'll actually provide a better answer to that question. You know what? We'll just go into it right now. So when we press play, we are actually loading up a whole bunch of information right here. So when I went into here, there's a whole bunch of things that appear in our hierarchy. If you're not familiar with Unity, the hierarchy, this tab right here, all of these objects that I'm scrolling through, is everything that exists in the scene. You'll notice that in the scene view over on the left side, as I go through objects here, it's going to highlight certain things. I have control over certain things. For example, if I want to take the Star Wolf, I can actually just move that wherever I want. So these are all things that exist in the scene. One of the things we load in is what's called a shmup mission parent. And this is this is the parent class that manages the state of the shmup level, if you will. So this is what you're really talking about when you're talking about shmup. We have, if you look over here in the right area, we have what's called an inspector. And the inspector is just the actual game object. I'm explaining a lot of things about Unity, so if you don't understand all this, it does require a little bit of understanding of Unity for the basic concepts. And I won't go into the details of that. There are great tutorials if you want to get into Unity programming and you want to learn the basics of this. So just sort of follow along if you can. But the idea is that we can add things called components onto game objects. And components are basically pieces of code that do things. For example, we have a transform which controls its position in space, just where it exists, which isn't really important for this component. But what is important is we have an event sequence, an event trigger, and an actual event. Event sequence is something that manages a bunch of events over time. This is the thing that's available on GitHub right now as open source, this whole thing that manages events. And what we want to do is that we want to indicate a couple of triggers which indicate when this event should happen, and then we need to actually put events in there which are the things that will happen when the triggers are true. So if we take a look at this event, we have an event trigger that says time since level load, and literally we just check as soon as it's been 0 seconds since we've loaded the game, as soon as the game starts, then it will perform this event sequence because we don't have any more triggers on here. The actual event that'll happen is start shmup mission, which is just an event that calls out a specific mission name and tells that to run. So we've got a little arrow here. That's because there's a couple of things underneath this shmup parent. We actually have two things that indicate what the shmup is. We've got a level manager, which we'll go into later, and the actual shmup mission. Shmup missions are pretty simple. They have a mission name, a length, and a debug time, so I can jump into the middle of a shmup level. And this is what defines what a level is. It's really just a shmup level is a period of time. You're already going to be at some location, and you're going to want to get to another location. And we just set sort of how long is it going to take for you to get between those two destinations. And that's stuff that's going to be determined based on where you're going, right? If you're at the Hollow Exeter station, you're going to the next station overwards, it's probably not going to take you very long. Maybe it'll be a very short mission. But if you're going, from the Hollow Exeter to like the depths of the Brotha Divide, that's going to be much longer. And so that mission length sort of controls that. Right now, this little test level that I'm running in for the demo today is just a 30-second mission. We might play around with that time later. What defines what actually happens in the shmup level and sort of what's going to take the bulk of the time is what's called the shmup level manager. And we've got a couple of pieces of this. So the way that shmup missions work is that they are dynamically generated. So although we build in experiences, enemy encounters, things that you might see, events that you might encounter during a shmup, like for example, we released the Galaxy promotion today that we're crossing over with them. One of the events that might happen is ATEC from Galaxy comes in, and basically challenges you to a race. So everything from spawning enemies to spawning environments to missions that happen to encountering other characters, those are all events. And we have this thing called a shmup level manager, which manages what sort of events can happen in your shmup level. The thing is, though, because it's dynamic, I don't know exactly how everything's going to go. So what we do is we put in a series of possible events, which I have a list here of possible event prefabs. And right now, we only have one possible event that can ever happen here, which is an event that spawns an enemy on that loop. That was the thing that you were seeing earlier with the enemy like looping around in the corner. That's one specific thing. If I can actually drop another enemy, in fact, I'm going to do that real quick. I'm going to drop in this destroyer, which spawns a huge destroyer model. Let's make sure the difficulty is set. It should be fine. Let me just check to make sure the difficulty is not too high on that. Yeah, we'll just put that at 0 just in case. So now I'm going to edit this. I actually did that while I was running. A common mistake in Unity, editing things while you're running it, because those don't actually save your changes. So I have to go into the actual shmup level again. So I'm working in this project folder down here, which is where all of the pieces of the project exist. And for example, one of the things that we have is that actually shmup level manager. See, when you're building stuff, the way that we're doing things in Starr Mazer is that we have a bunch of things called prefabs, which are basically preset game objects, things that we've built beforehand. When we're actually running the game, we load those into the game. There's a whole bunch of questions coming in there, so I'll catch up on that later. I can see things put by, but I'm going to finish talking about this topic. So if you've got a question, hold on, I will totally get to it. Anyway, so I'm going to edit this level manager, and we're going to add a new thing, because first we just had the enemy that was looping around. We want to see something else going on in there. So I'm going to go ahead and take one of our shmup patterns. I'm going to destroy pop the destroyer in there. So now we're going to have two possible events. I don't know what order these are going to happen in, because right now they're just sort of picked randomly. There's a couple of parameters that indicate when they'll be picked, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But let's go ahead and run the game, and as long as I coded this correctly, we'll be seeing a destroyer enemy pop in. So we've got the looping characters coming in at some point. And the destroyer isn't going to come in for a little while because the destroyer has its own triggers. We were talking about that earlier, triggers that prevent certain things from happening or make it so that things only happen a certain period of time. The destroyer only comes 15 seconds into the level. So now we have this destroyer that's coming in, and now I can go and fight this thing. And I only have one type of gun. I don't know if it's strong enough. But I actually don't get hit because I still haven't even gotten to coding in the collision on the ship, because collision, that's a thing you got to code. So I've gotten collision for bullets, and I just haven't messed with the ship stuff yet. Maybe we'll get to that today. We'll see. So yeah, basically what happened is we added in a new event into this mission, and we actually put some triggers. That event has some triggers, so it only happens at specific times, which gives us the ability to fully control the shmup level if we want to. So although the system is dynamic, and we have the ability to sort of let fate or let chance throw patterns at you, which is what will happen a majority of the time based on the state of the world, we can go down and fine tune to every little detail so that yes, at this exact moment on the shmup level you encounter this like mid boss, or you will always encounter like this location, which is maybe a stop that you want to go. And that allows us to have the ability to both make it dynamic experiences, so it's different every time you play through, and handcrafted specific experiences to evoke a certain emotion or have something very specific in the game happen. We have a lot of control over that. I'm going to go ahead and finish explaining this whole level manager because there were two events that happened, but there are a couple of different things that modify what can and can't happen. We have two curves here, which are really, if I bring up this editor, I can just go ahead and make a curve, which is just a value over time. And we have two values over time that we manage. We have difficulty and we have frequency. This is the difficulty curve right now, and right now I just have it flat because we haven't set a lot of difficulty for the and we should be back. I will find out in about 40 seconds as my video catches up, but we're going to go right back into what I was talking about. So just before we cut off, I was talking about difficulty curve and how we can set that in shmup levels. So this is an example of a difficulty curve that I've made, so that basically it ramps up. It starts off very easy, then it starts ramping up and gets a lot more difficult. We give the player a little bit of break, and then it starts ramping up slowly to a long period of difficulty, and then finally drops off for a bit of rest at the end. We can do these sorts of things. What the difficulty it's doing is it's just simply determining what sort of patterns, what sort of enemies, what sort of groupings can we send at the player, and that's what this determines right now. For testing, I just set it flat so I can make sure that the enemies come in that I want to come in, so I can make sure I test them correctly. But this will get modified a lot for every sort of shmup level that we have. The next curve that we have is the frequency curve, which is the same sort of idea. We can set how often enemies spawn. In this scenario, we have the value going from 1 to 5, and that's in seconds. So at the beginning of the level, we spawn an enemy every 1 second. At the end of the level, we spawn it every 5. And you'll notice that happening as the level goes on. The enemies spawn less and less frequently. If you look at the loop, there's a slight bit of delay between each one, and they start being farther and farther apart. So this one's they're spawning about 1, then it's like 1.1, then a little bit later than that, and there's getting a larger gap between each ones as you can see in that as their spawn frequency happening. And that's what frequency does. So we can control the pacing of a level very directly with these curves here. Now, there are other things that still have yet to be implemented into this system to give us more control over it. One of the systems that we're going to be implementing, and maybe we'll do that today, is the concept of tags, where these enemy groups we'll tag them. Maybe like, for example, there's a certain type of alien race that only exists in one area of the solar system. And so when you're in that area, you'll fight those enemies. But if you're outside of it, it won't happen. Or if you've pissed off a bunch of pirates, we'll enable the pirate flag, which means we'll be able to send pirate enemies at you because they're chasing after you exactly. Those will be further customizations for the system to be able to give us that control over shmup level. So to go all the way back to the question that was actually asked, how long does it take to make a shmup level? Once all of our content's built, we can literally build one in seconds just by throwing a few events in here, setting up the curve, and just setting the location that's going to be in. As far as right now, it's just how much time we want to put into it. It's rather variable. So I'm going to head back over to the chat. There's a whole bunch of things, and let's see if I can catch up with what's been going on here. So let's see here. And Serbia said, will the game be Xbox 360 controller compatible? I think that was asked twice. Yes, the Windows version will absolutely be 360 compatible. For the Mac version, if you have a specific driver, like I've got installed on my Mac, you'll be able to use the 360 controller. We have a simple implementation right now that if I plugged in the controller, it would probably work. I've mostly just been testing with my keyboard just because it's faster. But yeah, that actually came up earlier when we were talking about rumble support, which is a question that was asked in the Kickstarter page for a while. As far as rumble support goes, there's all these drivers and things that access certain parts of controllers for different operating systems. For Windows, it's absolutely guaranteed. There's this thing called Xinput, which allows us to access the rumble of various controllers, specifically the 360 controller. I think other controllers are not positive. As far as Mac and Linux goes, those drivers are not easily available. So we're going to have to look into and research that. But as far as game controllers, yes, whatever game controller you plug in, if it's not already mapped perfectly for the game, we're going to give you customizable settings so you can map the controller how you want to play Starr Mazer. And once again, we're still iterating on the exact details of it, but whether you like keyboard, mouse, gamepad, or any combination of that, when you're playing on your PC, those are all going to be accessible to you. The biggest challenge is going to be making sure that shit feels good while using just the mouse, but I think we'll be able to figure that out. I'm going to go back over the questions over here. Let's see here. I'm looking for question marks now. There's so many things here. Let's see, no transcoding on the stream, so the app may not be able to handle the bandwidth of the stream in particular. I've seen this happen before with smaller streams like this. So I might have to adjust the transcoding. We're using OBS on Mac, so it's a little unstable. Mac is my coding environment, so we'll keep trying this for a little bit. If we get another cutout like it happened before, I might adjust those settings. So if you have any suggestions on what are the best settings I should use, I'm a game developer and not a streamer, so I'm not as familiar with this setup. So any help would be appreciated. Let's see here. We're going to keep going. Sweet. It seems like it's working again, and everyone's back on board. How long have you been planning on this stream? How long am I planning on this stream being? We're going to probably go at this for maybe a couple hours. Then we're going to take a break, and we're actually going to start up again at 4. So we're doing 2 streams today. We'll see how involved we get into this. I've noticed that I've been doing a lot of explaining right now because you are all brand new to the system. None of you have seen this, whereas this is a system that I've been working in for a long time. So I might end up spending a lot of time explaining things, and we might not get into the meat of coding till later. So we're going to do 2 different streams, but basically, as long as you guys are interested, we'll keep doing things. I have plenty of work to do, so I could stream all day, and I would still be productive for me. So we'll sort of see how the stream goes along as you're all interested into it. Let's see here. Other questions? I believe Austin's doing one now and one at 4. Yes, yeah, to clarify that. These questions are probably like 1,000,000 hours old because you guys can ask questions a lot faster than I can answer them. We've got another one for Serbia. So, will there be difficulty spikes depending on how you interact with different people in the PNC parts, such as pissing off pirates, so the pirates will chase you? Absolutely. The actions that you take in the game are going to affect what sort of enemies you encounter. I hadn't fully considered exactly how those situations will modify the difficulty curve, but that is a system that we will need to build in at some point, because as you start encountering more enemies, making more people aggressive towards you, that's definitely going to change the difficulty of certain areas. And so it's very easy to understand that, when you're going through some sections, they might become more dangerous because maybe there's a war going on there, or people are watching for you there. And so the difficulty curves and then possibly the frequency curves of those areas will change. But the world's always adjusting, so there'll always be other routes that you can take that might be a little bit safer if you know the way to go. Let's see here. People talking about developing with Node. I've always wanted to use Node.js. I haven't. Let's see here. I think we are up with questions. Awesome. All right, cool. So I've seen that we've done with questions for a little while. We've talked a little about the shmup level manager. Let's go into actually building things. So I'm going to take a little bit of time before I go back into the questions. I'll check on the feed a little bit, but we are going to go in and make a new spline pattern. So let's think of an interesting pattern. We're going to have some classic Gradius style thing. We're going to have some enemies come in from the top and then slowly sweep down, and we'll have 2 enemy patterns do it at the same time. So they'll also come from the bottom and swoop over the top. So this will take us a little while to set up because we've got multiple things going on here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with a new game object, and we're going to call this a type of spline. Let's say this top to bottom spline. That's what we're going to name this guy. I'm zeroing it out, and I'm going to add a spline component to this, the Bezier spline, which will allow us to actually make the spline in here. We're going to add some curves to this and start modifying it. Now, one of the things that I actually want to add to this little spline editor is the ability to tell which is the start and which is the end points. I often, when I'm making my splines, will get a little confused and sometimes make them backwards. Fortunately, there's an easy way to flip that. But all right, we've got all these free. I want them to all be mirrored. Mirrored handles are just a little bit easier to deal with. They're easier to find. So I'm going to adjust those real quick. This is the mode for it, which tells us how these handles, when we adjust the card, how they work. Mirrored means that they will exactly mirror the length and the angle of the opposite handle on it. Just makes it a little easier to manage when you have all these dots in here. So we're going to come over here. The enemies are going to spawn up at this point. Let's flatten this out a little bit. They're going to cruise straight for a little while, and they're going to bend down. We're going to add another curve so we can get a couple more points to this Bezier spline. Here, I'm going to move this game window. We don't necessarily need to see this right now. We're going to focus on just the editor so I can look at just this beautiful spline we got going on here. Kind of want to, I wish I was like the Bob Ross of game programming. Like, oh, we're just going to take some happy little spline curves here and just gently caress them into a deadly enemy pattern. Isn't that nice? Alright, let's adjust those curves. I'm going to get picky with this and keep like tweaking it until it's perfect. That's alright. It's pretty good. Alright, and we're going to save ourselves a little bit of time. We're going to double this up. We're going to do a bottom to top spline. Actually like super picky about capitalization. Alright, bottom to top spline. So we're going to take this guy, move it down so we can see it. We'll put it right about there. I just thought of a feature I should add to this spline thing. The ability to grab multiple splines at once. Right now you have to grab one at a time. Sweet, so we got two cool splines in here. And these will work for paths that our enemies can walk upon. But these are just the paths themselves. These aren't actually enemies. So we're going to go ahead and attach a couple enemies here. What I want to do is I want to do a twin wave, where what we have is we have alternating enemies spawning from the top and the bottom one, back and forth. So this is actually going to be put all under one group. And I'm going to just grab a reference for my past ones, just so I make sure I do this correctly. But yeah, we just have to do an event sequence and spawner object. Okay, so now we're going to get into building an event. What this event is going to do is going to control the actual spawning of enemies. So those enemies are going to spawn on the top and bottom splines alternating, and we're going to spawn about, we'll do 4 of them on each. So what's going to happen is the enemies will spawn and they'll fall along these curves and they'll swoop into each other. So we're going to create not a new scene, but a new game object. Shortcuts. That's what I wanted. So we're going to call this event spawn enemy top bottom. Great creative name right there. And we're going to just go ahead and group our splines underneath here. We're going to add an event sequence. So this is using the event system that is available on GitHub right now. And so I'll get to go into these details a little bit. If you are interested in using that, feel free to download the source off GitHub. We're going to make this repeatable. So yeah, I'll talk a little about this. So all events have a name. It's just a name so I can recognize what it is. So when we're debugging things, I know what event we're talking about. Allow auto trigger means that triggers can automatically make this event happen. There's sort of two types of event triggers in the event system. There are active ones and passive ones. As far as passive ones go, that just means that when an event is asked, it will then determine whether or not that this event can pass or not. As far as active ones go, they're actively checking to see if they get passed, and when they do, they let the event sequence know so that the event sequence, if allow auto trigger is checked, to happen automatically. This is sort of useful if you want to have an event wait for some event of something to happen, as opposed to specifically setting something like a cutscene. Repeatable just makes it so we can do this event multiple times. Seeing this is going to spawn enemies, we might use this pattern multiple times at a shmup level, we want it to be repeatable. Priority and wait are used for event groupings. It's a more complicated aspect of the event system. We don't really need to get into that right now. But as far as trigger, we're going to have a difficulty. This required difficulty, we're going to put it at, I don't know. Well, it doesn't matter right now, but we'll set it at 0.2. And just double checking with the strafe. Yeah, they have just difficulty trigger. And then we're going to actually spawn some objects. So what's going to happen, like I said, we're going to spawn things alternatively. So we're going to spawn an object on a spline, because that's what we have here. We have all these splines. This is going to be order determines which order the event's going to happen. That's going to make a little more sense when we add in a bunch of events into here. Wait for event complete means we don't go to the next event until this one is finished. We're going to leave that type. Object factory type. This is the type of enemy that we're going to spawn. If we check back here, we have an enemy called enemy small, so that's the enemy we're going to use. Enemy smalls are the little rotating enemies that you've seen that we've been fighting against so far. The actual spline is we're going to start on the top one, so I'm just going to drag this top to bottom spline in there so it knows to reference this spline, which is that top curve that goes to bottom. Move speed, this is a variable that determines how fast they move. I think we just want to, yeah, we want 0.1. So this determines how fast along the curve that they're going to move. This move curve, this one's really interesting. This is how enemies are going to move along this curve path. So we have curves within curves, yo dog, exhibit and all that. What this actually means is that this is going to be the rate at which they travel across that spline. If you're familiar with doing any sorts of animation with tweens or animation-based systems, then you'll be familiar with these. And basically what's going on is that we're saying, what is the rate of distance traveled over time? So 0 being the beginning of the spline and 1 being the end of the spline. This means that it's going to travel it over linearly. If we did something like this, it would start moving very slowly and then suddenly move, and then over time move quickly across the spline. We're going to go linear right now because that's all we need. We don't want any fancy patterns of that. But this is actually a really powerful control that gives you a great amount of depth and variety of the way enemies move around. Look forward means that it will actually look in the direction that it's moving. We're not going to check that for this one because we want them always sort of moving fast, so they're sort of banking down is what's going on. Forward adjust is what determines what's the front of the sprite, because sprites can have all sorts of fronts. We're not going to touch that. Loop mode, we just want this to happen once, but we can actually have enemies loop around on splines, which is good for like boss patterns that will stick around until you defeat them until a time event happens. Face forward on ping pong is just whether they face backwards in a ping pong event. We don't details, don't worry about that. All right, we're going to just start with a very simple thing. We're going to add another. We're going to add a delay, which is going to be 1 in the order sequence. So now this event spawn object will be the first event to happen, and this event delay will be the second one to happen, which is why that order variable is there. And we're just going to wait for 1/10 of a second, and then we're going to spawn in another object on a spline. Do the same sort of thing. We're going to spawn an enemy small. We're going to now do it on the bottom to top, so it spawns on the other splinator. We actually want it to move over time, so we'll set that. And that looks good. That's sort of what we want for this. So this is the event that actually is going to be triggered by our shmup. And that shmup is going to say that, okay, I want this pattern to happen. Since we're going to test it, we're going to modify our shmup to only use this event. So it'll pop up every time. We can make sure it's working. It's always good to put in systems to be able to force things to happen in your game so you can save yourself hours of debugging. So let's see here. We've got the Hollywood Treyarch. We've got the shmup mission parent. We're going to go into this event here. All right, and we're going to replace that with the new enemy top to bottom. That's the one. Yeah, I think this is the one we just made. We're going to have a lot of these. We're going to have to come up with a better naming convention of these because those are going to get lost. So we're going to go ahead and try this. Let's. I'm going to bring up the game window side by side once again, just so we can make sure our enemies are spawning. Alright, sweet. We got some enemies spawning in there, but you'll notice they're just sort of sitting still, so I must have done something wrong. Let's go take a look at it. It's got the spawn there. You know what I think's going on? I think these are backwards. So I'm going to play with this a little while. We're going to find out exactly what's going wrong. It has been a little while since I've played with this system, so I might be doing things somewhat incorrectly. That's the thing about building dynamic systems. They can not always perform exactly how you were expecting them to. We're going to trim this down. Let's take a look at what our console is saying. So this is a little console here. This thing tells me exactly what's going on. I've put out a bunch of logs to sort of see what's going on here. And they're spawning all right, so it's actually doing top to bottom. It's going through the event sequence. But it always says performing event 0, which means it's actually not even getting to the second one. It's never completing the event, so this whole thing isn't playing through correctly. It could be a possibility with move speed, it could be, it's starting them in the right location. But I'm curious if something's going on. Let's take a look at this in 3D just to make sure I didn't break anything. Those handles are good. They look like they're in the right position. I wonder if it's just moving way too slow. Let's try speeding it up a little bit. I'm going to remove these events so we just have one thing going on. Whenever you encounter an issue and you don't know exactly what's going on, it's best to simplify the problem. So let's go ahead and see where this gets us. Welcome to programming, the wide world of debugging. There they go. Now they're actually moving across, but they're spending a lot of time in here, which means that the movement curve that I have is not exactly what I want it to be. So they are actually moving, but they sit there for a very long time before going forward. So this is either an issue with our spline, that there's too much stuff going on there, or our movement curve. Let's play around with a couple of things. I'm going to play with the spline. I'm pretty sure it's an issue with the way the spline is built. Let's get in here so we can focus on just modifying this spline. That's ideally a little better. They're still not deciding to move along the curve. Let's go do that edit outside of the game and see where that gets us. Yeah, they were definitely moving way too fast. That should be working fine, but that could also be the issue. I'll take a look at this again, see how it goes. Make sure my triggers are good. Top to bottom. Yeah. Let's take a look at how this does. There we go. That's so much nicer. Yeah, so I just had the spline sort of set up odd, and that spline going backwards, I didn't really care for it too much. So sweet, now we've got the top ones coming in. Let's go ahead and fix that again so we've got the bottom ones coming too. So we're going to add a delay. You know what I think, what if I didn't set, I'd have to go back to the video and check. I might not have set the order correct for the second one. Wait for a delay, spawn, a spline. Alright, so now this one should be spawning 2 enemies. We're going to try this out. Yeah, now it's only spawning them from the bottom. So something's going on with our trigger here. That's not acting the way I want it to. It could be grabbing both the enemies. Oh no, I got blown up. Let's take a look at this in further detail. Oh yeah, I did it again. I didn't set the order correctly. So this order variable, even though they're in sequence, it's not necessarily the order that they're going to happen. So we have 0, 1, 0, which means that it just overrides this with a second spawn event. We're going to put that in, and that should make it a little bit better. And now they're always prioritizing at the top. So this might be a bug in my actual core code that's controlling these things. We might have to dive into code for a little bit. All these things are actually pieces of code that I have written before. I'll show you this real quick. If I go into this enemy spawn top to bottom and I look at the spawn event on Spline, this is the actual code that runs it. So this is the stuff that I wrote before. This was all written by me, which means, who knows, maybe I have an error in here. We might have to dive into it a little bit. First, we'll take a look at it from the editor for a little bit longer. We'll go ahead and modify the delay time. And we're also going to make it so that enemies spawn less frequently, so we can take a look at one event happening at a time. It could be that it's actually grabbing enemies that are already spawned, which can happen based on the factory that we have, if you're familiar with coding and know what factories are. So let's go ahead and adjust the frequency. We'll bump that up to an enemy every 4 seconds. Sweet, so it's still doing that one from the top, and it's not doing another one. Let's take a look at a couple of things. First thing I'm going to check is in the level manager, how many enemies are activated. So we're only activating one of them. We perform event 0, which is spawn enemy top bottom. But then we're never actually getting to event 2, which means that event is not completing. Now I remember. So, the code is working exactly how I said I wanted it to work. This whole wait for event complete thing, this thing right here, is actually waiting for the entire movement, spline movement curve to happen. I actually don't want us to wait for it. I should probably modify that. This is actually like the 3rd time I've done this in previous workings of the game, so it's not intuitive, and I might want to adjust how that actually works. Let's see if I'm actually correct about that. We got one spawning on the top, one spawning on the bottom, and then they're going to do their little crisscross thing. Sweet. So this is our simple pattern. We're going to want to adjust this up a little bit because I want 4 enemies and not just 2. But I've been noticing a bunch of stuff going over in the stream. So we're going to let this thing look all pretty while I go catch up on some questions over here. Let's see here. Where have we? There's so many. There's so much thing. There's a lot of text here. I'm not going to be able to read all this, guys. So I'm going to try looking for some question marks. Alright, am I the only one who actually read the update that said he'd be on Twitch at 12? Servius might have been. But don't worry, we're going to be 2 of them. If you're not around, which you wouldn't know because you're not here, we're going to do another one. So, alright, Servius has got a couple questions loaded up for here. Will the game run at 60 FPS regardless of how many enemies are on screen at the shmup sections? That is my absolute goal. The game should constantly be running beautiful. Yes, yeah, the game's going to run well. Let's see, and that's going to happen on every platform as well, which I know that the 3DS and Vita will be a challenge. If we make those stretch goals, which, guys, if you haven't told everyone, you should probably tell people about it so we can reach those stretch goals. Today's been going really well. We're almost at our goal. It's really exciting. I've just been refreshing the page on occasion. I'm seeing that number go up. We are very close to 150K. We might make the goal tonight if people are really pitching in for it, in which case then we can start focusing on the stretch goals for our 24-hour stream this weekend, which would be awesome because I totally want to bring this game to 3DS. I want that challenge of making it really hard to make it run 60 FPS even on that hardware, but we'll make that happen. And do we have any plans for DLC for the game? Yes, we do. Starr Mazer is going to be a complete package experience as we deliver it, but because of the way the system works, actually now that you've been checking out the code with me, you can see how we can actually easily add content to the game. So for DLC, we could add in new enemies, new enemy patterns that just start appearing in the shmup sections. And that just enhances the world that you're playing through. So the next time you play through it after downloading a DLC pack, you might encounter new enemies, new locations, but it doesn't actually disrupt the story. In fact, it only enhances it. Because of the way everything's built, it's all individually functional, but reflects on the state of the world. It's very easy for us to add lots of new content that completely changes your play experience. So we're really actually excited for the DLC opportunities that we have in the game. Let's see here. Other questions? I'm going to like highlight it this time so I don't have to scroll all the way to the top where I don't know it is. People are all about, oh man, Triptide did this thing where you labeled the question with a nice bracket. I really appreciate that. That's easy to find. So Triptide asks, Austin, I saw some explosions earlier. Video style sprite actually. Are these placeholders or design choice? And if the latter, what motivates this choice? This is a question that is not for me because I actually wasn't involved in the decision to put that style in it. So I'm going to talk about what my assumption is and what my hopes are. Yes, you'll notice that actually I'll just load it up. In case you don't know exactly what we're talking about, you'll notice that the game has a very specific aesthetic and the sort of types of sprites that are going on. But when I blow up one of those enemies, it's a very detailed explosion. There's crazy amounts of detail in there. It's actually a little bit different than the pixel art that's going on here. I personally am not a huge fan of that style of explosion. I think it's actually in reference to the sort of Sega Saturn PSX era of video games where there were lots of really high quality textures, a lot of pre-rendered stuff, and so it looks like it's straight out of one of those things. In my personal opinion, it clashes a little bit with our style, and I want some more like retro, like Robotech-like explosions. But that's really going to be up to Don and Christina as the final style of that. So I will be fighting that fight, but we'll see how it goes. Oh no, everyone's mourning the loss of Brickstonewood dying. Yes, it was sad. Let's see here. Are they pulling enemies from a pool at the same time? I had to deal with that bug the other day. So that's interesting, Big Bold Flank, that you were dealing with this exact thing. I'll talk a little bit about how that works. So when these enemies spawn in the game, they already exist. What happens is I'm going to go through and show you something. There's a technique in programming called pooling, where what you do is whenever you create something, like say you want to put an enemy in the game world for it to exist, every time you do that, which is called instantiating, it's very expensive on the system. And if done incorrectly, it can actually cause the game to stutter or freeze. Now, if you see a game stutter or freezing, that doesn't necessarily mean it's from instantiation. But it can be taxing on the system depending on how much you're asking the system to do at once. So generally what happens is that instead of instantiating things while the game is running, so like an enemy spawns and we instantiate it right there, we're not actually instantiating there. We already did this during the loading screen. So when I hit play button, it takes a little while to load. That's because if we actually go into the level manager, I have this thing called an enemy small factory, which what it does is it creates 10 enemies at the beginning of the stage. This will allow it so that I can have 10 enemies on screen at once. Now I can increase that number, I can put it up to 100, however many enemies we need. Then the challenge is making sure that runs at 60 frames per second. But what's going to happen is I'm going to go ahead and play this, and you're going to see that all these are dark, which means they're disabled. So these enemies actually all exist in the world. They actually all exist at this point, but they're not turned on. And what's going to happen is when we spawn one of these guys, which is going to happen right there, one of them turned on. So now we can actually look at this guy. So this wasn't instantiated. We just flipped a switch to turn it on, because turning something on and off is much cheaper than actually instantiating an object. And so as the game continues and more of these enemies spawn, you're going to see more of these light up. And that's because enemies are coming in. Now, the factory has the ability to do one of two things when we decide to spawn it, because eventually we're going to get to 10 enemies. And what if in the game, for some reason, it wants to spawn an 11th? That's a situation we have to deal with. There's two ways of dealing with it. One is that we just don't grab an enemy. They're all in use, they're all in screen, and we don't want to disrupt any one of those to bring in a new one. The other one is we forcefully grab it. We don't care that they're already on screen. We'll just take one of those and put it back in. Generally, that forceful situation is good for particle effects or for like little sprites and pixels and things like that, just because the player's not going to really notice if one goes away. Actually, secret tip in sports ball, that's what happens to the lances. There's only over 20 lances on screen, but it's a big enough number so you never really notice it. But things that do matter, such as like an enemy or a boss fighting you, you don't want that to go away in the middle of it just because you want to spawn another of those. Generally, what you'll do is you actually go back and increase the number that you can have on screen, and then you optimize for that. But that's sort of how that is functioning right now. Let's see here. Going back to questions. I should have highlighted there. Okay, so we got that question. Do you mostly use MonoDevelop when working with Unity, or do you use a different editor? I actually, Ionata. I do use MonoDevelop. It's just nice. I can use my dark theme. I really love this. So this code, it's all like red and green and black and everything. I think it just looks pretty. I should probably find a better environment to work with, especially for debugging features, which I don't often use. I know they can be powerful, but generally the sort of code that I'm writing is pretty high level, and I don't necessarily need to go that deep into it. This has been an issue in the past, but especially when I was doing the replay system for sports ball, it was a little hard to debug that. So I should probably get familiar with other tools, but this has been working for me. So if you have any suggestions, I'd love to hear what you use. Let's see here, going through, we got another question. Servius, will the DLC cost anything, or will it be like Shovel Knight being free? As far as I understand, there is a large portion of the Shovel Knight content DLC is free because they were goals achieved on the Kickstarter. So basically, the fans had already paid for that by contributing to the Kickstarter. As far as what we're gonna do, I guarantee that there will be paid DLC, but there will probably also be aspects of it being free. As far as that goes, that'll be like business decisions made by the group or whatnot. So I don't know the exact details of it, but I can imagine there's going to be things that we'll want to release for free. There'll also be larger things that require lots of development time and to have us bring the whole team back on board. And that's probably going to we're probably going to treasure that because it's probably going to cost us a lot of money to live while we make those things. All right, more questions. All right. Oh, here's another question. Will you be showing us on how you develop the PNC parts, or will you be just focusing on the shmup parts for the stream? For today's stream, we're just going to focus on the shmup parts. The large reason behind that is because we don't have tons of detailed assets for the PNC section. So although that's functional, it just doesn't look as pretty. And so because we're only showing off sort of certain aspects of the game, we want to show off the stuff that looks a little bit prettier. Code and menu windows aren't too interesting. So at the very least, I want to make sure there are these beautiful sprites on screen while you check it out. But as far as future episodes of Starr Mazer TV, yes, like I want to be streaming a lot more of the development of it. I want to show all the systems of it. So in the coming months, you'll definitely be seeing us build some PNC sections. In fact, I mean, because some of the backers are going to be creating content for us or helping us create content based on the amount that you pledge, it would be cool to have that stuff live on stream if the backer is up for that. So that'd be cool. If you're down for that, let's do that. What about the dynamic pooling factory that makes more if it needs it, but just starts with 10? So I think this is a reference to the pooling aspect. I don't exactly understand the question here, Fortbase, but let's see here. That makes more if it needs it, but just starts with 10. Oh, yeah. Okay, so now I hear what you're saying. You're talking about you could have a pooling factory that when you need to spawn that 11th one, that it instantiates it. You can do that. I have used that in the past before. I used that in an old shmup that I made in the years ago. But basically, that can still be an issue because it might be expensive. Generally, what I would do in those situations is that I'll write in some code to generate as many as we need for testing, but then we'll go back and record how many we actually needed and then optimize the game for that and then just create that many at the beginning so we don't have any stutters on like weaker computer systems. All right, sweet. We have talked about a bunch of things. We have covered the whole aspect. I just noticed that the Starr Mazer TV thing is blocking part of the name, but that's fine. It'll look all right. Most of the stuff up here that's under the Starr Mazer logo you don't really need to see too often. Well, I'll adjust it later. So let's see here. We need to finish up this enemy pattern that we're going to do. So let's go ahead and add a couple more enemies to it so we get this nice top and bottom alternating spawn event going on. So we're going to add another delay because we want the enemies to pop up one after another. That delay time of 1 second was way too long, so we're going to bump that down to 0.1. And this is going to be a lot faster because it's already functioning, it's already working. We just need to add a little bit more content to it. So I'm going to use that. I wish you guys could hear the jams that I'm playing. They're super fun. I'm actually going to go, I wonder if I should go load them up. I paused them for a little while so I could like focus on talking with you guys. But the issue is that Twitch doesn't want us to have music that we don't own, which is totally legit. So that means you guys can't hear the awesome beats that I like to listen to. If you guys want to follow along with the music I'm listening to, we'll actually hop over. I use Spotify for a bunch of my music. I don't know if you all have access to it, but I have a playlist called Future Bass, which has some songs that I own and some songs that are available on Spotify. So if you want to hang out with me and listen to these jams when we get into some coding, feel free to do so. All right, we don't want them to move too fast. We want them to curve linearly. I'm going to add another delay because we're going to have them go back and forth, up and down. So we're going to put 8 total, 4 on the top, 4 on the bottom. Pro tip for programmers, it's always good to use the tools that you actually design for others, because then you realize that there are things that would be so much more convenient if you had access to them. For example, I really wish I had the ability to sort of copy and paste these events here. It would save me a bunch of time. But that'll be something I have to code in later. How many do we have? 1, 2, 3. All right, this should be the last one. Good. All right, let's see if it works. We should have enemies spawning alternating on the top and bottom, going in a cool curving pattern. Here, let's focus on this. I'm confident it'll work, so we'll just look at the game. Nope, we just got one. I must have put in something that broke it. Probably the same issue I had before, not alternating them correctly. Not setting the order correctly. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Here we go. 14. And I also don't want to wait for them to finish their looping. Forgot about that one. Should probably turn that off by default. All right. Let's get a little more focus on this game window. Oh man, look at those little guys. That was a cool pattern. I'm gonna blow them all up. Bonus stage like Gradius, right? Notice how only 10 of them appeared. That's because I've got too many enemies on screen. So let's crank that number up. And the actual spawner right over here. Should say how many. Oh yeah, it creates a spawner at the beginning. Where is the spawner that gets created? I have to go find out where that spawner gets instantiated. I actually instantiate the factory as well. Yeah, this factory script is an enemy small. That's the default number. We're going to have to modify that default number, which means we're going into code. So the code I'm looking for is the level shmup manager, I think. should be a default number of enemies on this one. Here we go, 10. I don't like that that's just a variable. So this is a bunch of code. I'm not going to go into all the details here, but so when the game starts up, we create those factories that we're able to spawn enemies in. Right now I have it just set to a hard value of 10, and I want to sort of adjust that. I'm going to eventually need to put a broader system in here that allows me full control over all the types of enemies that we're going to be spawning, but for now we're just going to put in a simple thing, which is enemy factory limit. This is a variable, it's just an integer, which we're going to use to indicate how many enemies we can have on screen at once for any given enemy type. So what that's going to result in is we're going to go all the way back to this shmup level manager. We're going to wait for the code to compile, which is this little running bit in the bottom right here. And then sweet, now we have an enemy factory limit. We're going to crank that up to 30. And now we should be seeing a lot more enemies on screen. At least I think so. We'll find out if my code worked correctly. Alright, we got those 4 enemies. Yeah, alright. I'm going to just dodge all these bullets. Isn't that pretty? I love beautiful shot patterns. Now here's an interesting thing. These enemies are just chilling here. Why are they just chilling there? That's a bug. We're going to have to fix that bug. Alright, I'm interested to see what you guys want to do next. So we've got a couple of different options. We just finished one shmup pattern, so we can go ahead and build a different shmup pattern. And if you're interested in building a different shmup pattern, then go ahead and let me know what sort of path type thing you want me to make. The other option that we have is we can go ahead and try fixing this bug. The fact that these enemies are just sitting here dicking around and not actually going back onto the spine loops, that's a bug in the game. I'll probably have to get into the code to fix that. So let me know what you want me to fix while I catch up on the questions back here on the stream. Let's see here. All right. I know how to scroll through this now. All right, DJ Dane. Yo, Austin, my dog. How's it going, DJ Dane? I know this guy. Did you get a chance to listen to my theming submission? I have not listened to it yet because literally I came off the bus from Vancouver. I got here, I stuffed a burrito in my face, and then I turned on the stream. I was in Vancouver this morning, which is a country away. I went to this awesome meetup called Full Indie last night, where I got to talk about sports ball and Starr Mazer. I saw a bunch of awesome friends, and it was super cool. Let's see here. So, yeah, they were mentioning don't put music in. You shouldn't be hearing my music. It should just be feeding to me. You can play your own music beats if you want. Let's see here. I hope Markiplier also plays this game. That would be the best to watch that. Oh man, Faziski just posted that there's less than 10k to go, which means we must have hit 150k today, everyone. Holy, we're getting close. We're getting real close. If this thing keeps happening, then I don't know, I might turn on the second stream today and I might get to announce that we're funded. I really want to be with the rest of the team. They're on a film set right now, but we'll Skype them in or something. They're probably too busy, but that's going to be exciting. It could happen today. All right. Fort Base was looking for my Future Base one. It might not be a public playlist. If you want to sneak for it, you just look for Future Base 1 hour mix on YouTube. It's really good. It's weird music. I don't know if you're all about Future Base, but let's see here. You said you fixed but only found out it doesn't work is the worst thing ever. Yes, but that's okay. That's the life of a programmer. All right. DJ Dane back to 15, but trying to see if I can afford bumping out to 40 for that soundtrack award. Thank you so much, DJ Dane. That would be amazing if you could do that, because you'll get 4 different soundtracks at that tier, actually, because of all the amazing backup that we've had and all the support and hitting that milestone earlier for to get that Themix album. Oh man, Captain Zex has come to heckle me. I'm excited for that. Anyway, Tanodia. That's how I'm going to pronounce your name. Tell me if that's wrong. Tenadia, have you thought about how many buttons keys the game will use? I have been thinking about that nonstop. Right now, the shmup section uses like a million buttons. It's terrible. Let me show you all the buttons I have. I've got WASD going on here. Not that you can see me hitting the keys, but WASD, that's for movement, right? We have a button that actually fires bullets right here. We have a button that changes the type of bullets you have firing. I actually don't have these bullets on. Oh, there we go. We got triple phone on. So that's what, 6 buttons right now. The doubles aren't turned on right now. You see they don't do anything, but the triples are turned on. So that's 6 buttons. Then we have a shift up, which allows your ship to move faster. And that's why that thrust happens. Then we have a shift down, which actually moves your ship slower. So right now, we have 8 different buttons for the shmup section. That's too many buttons. There are actually more things that we need to be able to do. We need you to be able to like converse with people and be able to use items or power-ups in this area. There also needs to still be a pause button for when you exit out. So there's a lot of buttons in the game right now, and I want to reduce that, but I have to figure out exactly how. That'll be an interesting challenge. So we'll see how we're going to be reducing that. Let's see here. How about making a new shooting pattern? Oh, for the enemies. Okay, we could go into muzzles. That's interesting. Fuziski, I have not had a chance to play your fan art because I was in a different country. But don't worry, we're going to play Fuziski's fan art on the 24-hour stream because Fuziski made fan art that you can actually play. He got very creative with the fan art submission, which is going on till tonight. So totally, if you have anything that you want to submit for your fan art, whether it's drawings or interpretive dance or games or novels or whatever you have, send it to us. And the deadline is tonight, but if it gets to us a little bit later, I think we'll still be able to fit it into the stream. Let's see here. Can you make the bullets themselves do a wave pattern or make pictures? Yes, we can. I can show you a real quick example. All right. Captain X, I'm going to show you one of the examples that we have implemented in the, just as sort of a test. But we can actually have enemies do this. So where is it? In here somewhere. We got the star pattern. There's a lot of things called star in here. Muzzle star, here we go. I'm just going to drop this in, and we're going to see what this muzzle system did that Miles programmed. This is code that he gave me support for. So we can do cool little bullet patterns like this guy right here, which is really exciting. What it does is it changes to a sort of star pattern over time. It uses these modulators and incrementers to actually adjust the bullet pattern. You also see that some of those bullets are disappearing. That's because we have way too many bullets on screen all at once. That's once again that same factory issue. But yes, so the same system that has enemies shoot, we can do crazy things like this. It's just all about figuring out which numbers to set correctly and how to adjust it. So who knows, maybe we can make an enemy that spawns out some crazy pattern like this. That's been sort of 2 talks about that idea.